What's up, everybody? Welcome to Back to the Future, the podcast that takes a trip down Philly sports memory lane and asks the question, what if? I'm your host, Jim Montgomery. You can follow me on Twitter at Jimbo_Mont. Also, if you're listening or watching on YouTube, make sure to give us a like and a follow. Helps the algorithm out. I don't even know what that means, but I hear people saying it on other podcasts all the time, so it must be true. So go ahead, help me out. And today we are going to talk a little college football, which in the city of Philadelphia definitely means something different than it does in other parts of the country. So this past weekend was the opening week 0, which I don't know how it's week 0, but I guess because only a handful of teams played, they couldn't or didn't want to say week 1. But college football opened up this weekend, and I wanted to take a look today and talk about the college football landscape in the city of Philadelphia. It's almost like there's a lack of interest in the city college football schools. Now, granted, there's only 2 schools. You have Temple and Villanova is 1AA or FCS or whatever the letters are now. And I just want to kind of talk about what or why that is and what leads to that. And a lot of people will say, oh, well, in the South, it's different because there's not a lot of NFL cities. There's not a lot of other sports. When you get into the Northeast, for instance, a city like Philadelphia has the Eagles, Phillies, Sixers, Flyers. So there's definitely a little bit of competition for what people want to watch. I don't know. I think I call BS on that because to me, football is football. And as you look around this, again, born and raised in this area, the 5-county region of Philadelphia, never really living anywhere else besides here, you see a lot of interest in other smaller colleges like Westchester, Kutztown, schools like that. And high school is big. I went to Coatesville, and Friday night football was huge throughout Chester County. And I mean, you see it on any of the local news stations. I know Channel 6, Channel 10, they fly their helicopters around from game to game, showing aerial shots and everything like that. They have reporters down there. So I don't think it's a lack of interest. Like I said, football is football. I went to Temple, but I remember my first game as a college football experience was going down to a Temple game. I believe I went with my friend and his dad because there was a guy that played running back for Coatesville, Dwayne Miller, who went to Temple. And this was probably like early 90s, maybe like 92, 93. And I remember we were excited to go down because we would go to the football games, watch him play, and knowing that he was at Temple someplace close. So they were a Big East school, and I don't know. I just think that that's an easy excuse. But today I kind of want to dive into this and see really what's going on here in Philly and the college football scene. And I want to actually offer then a possible solution, which I don't think at this point there's any way it'll ever happen. But at one point in time, all 6 of the city schools, Temple, LaSalle, Drexel, Penn, Villanova, and St. Joe's, all had football teams. I mean, we're talking probably 80, 90 years ago. But I'm going to just kind of go into what could have been, and that's where we're going to start off today because Philly, believe it or not, has a long history of college football. Those teams were great, and we're going to go into that, and we'll start off with LaSalle. And LaSalle was an interesting case because their original run ended in the early 40s, right when World War II happened, because as the United States entered the war, there was just not enough male students. So the original program died in the early 40s because of World War II, but then it returned as a club sport, and there was always some interest. And the second run was more recently. They were a Division I AA school. I believe that occurred in like the late 90s. They started, might even been the early 2000s, where they brought the team back and competed again as a 1AA or FCS, whichever one you want to call it. So there was football at LaSalle. then you have St. Joe's, and again, everybody thinks of St. Joe's, the Hawk will never die. Personally, as a Temple person, not a big St. Joe's fan. No offense to my Hawk lovers out there, but they also had a football program that was Division One, playing the bigger schools that you probably are used to hearing. They ended their school in 1939 basically because they ran out of money. They were in the process of building like a 70, 80,000 seat stadium, which back then is pretty huge. But then they didn't know if they could compete because of the team and whether it would be a good use of their money or not. And I'm paraphrasing some of this. I did speak to some people. A lot of this information I'm giving you, by the way, is coming from the research I did when I was doing the research before my book became Eagle centric. I was trying to get as many different views and things, and I still might do something with it because I have so much and like a wealth of research that I did on this. But this was talking with people that are connected with St. Joe's, and it wasn't necessarily a popular decision among the students, but the administration, they weren't sure. I mean, back then, if you can imagine a 70,000, 80,000 seat stadium out on City Line Avenue, it could get costly. So they have not had football since 1939. Drexel, they ended their football team in 1973 or 74, sometime in the early 70s. And their philosophy was, it wasn't necessarily due to the money the football team was costing them, but they wanted to redistribute that money that they were paying for the football team to other sports and their intramural teams. So do you kind of sense a theme here that money is definitely playing a role in a lot of this? Penn, which to me, this was the most interesting thing. I did not know this until I was actually doing the research. But they're basically one of the oldest college football teams ever. They've played the most games ever, and they're a pretty decent team in the Ivy League. They play right down in West Philly at Franklin Field. They were Division One, but in the early '80s, I think they switched down to. I think the entire Ivy League did, to be honest, switched down to 1AA, and that's where they've been ever since. I'm going to get to Nova in a minute, but I want to just talk about Temple. And basically, Temple, I think, of all of the schools in the city, they're the ones that have probably had at a Division One level the most success. Believe it or not, I know. They were so horrible for so many years, but they played in the first Sugar Bowl, which is pretty cool. I believe I don't want to get it wrong, but I want to say it was either Auburn or LSU. It was basically a current day SEC school, I believe, is who they played. Then they were in the Big East. Then they were kicked out of the Big East. They went to the MAC. Then they were back in the Big East. Now they're in the American. But I think overall they have had the biggest run or the most successful run at a Division One level. And I say that caveat there at a Division One level because then you have Villanova. And before I get into the history of the Villanova football program, I just want to say one thing. I know I'm going to alienate a lot of my fellow Temple brethren out there. However, they're a Philadelphia school. And they're not a Philly school, they're on the main line thing is, I used to say, don't get me wrong, but I mean, if you think about it, it's bullshit. Does that, because they're not in the quote unquote city limits, that means they're not a city school. They're like 15 minutes away, and some spots of the city you could probably be there in like 10 minutes. And that, to me, that's like saying, do only Philadelphians get to be Eagles fans? So if somebody like me who didn't grow up in the city, sorry, Jim, you don't get to be an Eagles fan because you don't live in Philadelphia. The whole narrative of them being not a Philly school is bullshit. I'm not a fan of them, so let me get that straight. I've never been a big Nova fan. I probably never will. But I do respect what they've done, especially in basketball with Jay Wright. But the whole non-Philly school thing, sorry. And go ahead, blow up my fan mail, my chat, the comments, whatever. they're a Philly school. Deal with it. But they had their football team was old as well and has a long, rich history. And it stopped after they disbanded it in the early 80s. And I think part of what their fears and their concerns and what they got rid of the program for also stemmed from money. And it was not a popular decision. And in all of these cases, that it was not popular for the school to get rid of those teams. There was a ton of pressure and a ton of pushback on the administration to bring football back. And that goes back, it was only like 2 or 3 years later that this pressure started to come. And I know there's stories about the school was having secret meetings and trying to figure out a way. And they were very shady about how they were going to bring it back. But they eventually brought it back in the late 80s as a 1AA program, or FCS. And overall, they've been actually pretty successful. I believe they've won a Division or 1AA or FCS national championship. They're constantly in the playoffs. They've made it to the Final Four. They've actually produced a lot of NFL players. Howie Long, I believe, was before they disbanded the program. But as an Eagles fan, I mean, Brian Westbrook is arguably one of the top 3 running backs in the history of the team. He came out of Villanova. The other name I always think of, and I always forget because I believe it was in Andy Reid's first year, and I can still picture the play, but Brian Finneran catching the bomb to beat the Eagles on like inside like a minute or so in that game, who had actually a pretty solid NFL career. So they're successful. And that's why I always want to differentiate Temple and Nova, because Temple, I think from a Division I standpoint, is way more successful. Overall, as much as it pains me to say, I would give Nova the nod as the better football team. And I mean, there have been times where they'll start the season off as they'll play each other in the opening game. And I've seen Nova beat Temple a couple times in games they shouldn't have. So there's your little history lesson of the history of college football in Philly. And it is a pretty rich and old history. Goes back like to the early days of football. And a lot of these schools were very competitive. They had popular teams. And it was just, for one reason or another, the schools and the administration decided the money was not worth it. So they disbanded it, much to the dismay of guys like me who live in the area and want to support a local team, because we do have Penn State, which is the Pennsylvania State University, but Penn State is also 3 hours away from Philly. Granted, people will cling and do stuff with that. To me, I just never really, as much as I tried. I mean, everybody in my family is Penn State fans. There's pictures of me that I've had Penn State gear. It was sort of one of those things that was always pushed on me, and I just never really latched on. I did always have a fondness for Temple. Football, I just didn't understand why their teams were so bad, but they were always on because they were in the Big East when I was coming of age and starting to watch football. So I'd watch them against the Miamis of the world. I used to watch them against Syracuse, teams like that. Well, Rutgers was a Big East team, but Boston College, Virginia Tech. So they were always on. They were always getting beat. But I kind of gravitated toward Michigan. So I'm also a Michigan fan, which, ironically enough, when Penn State went to the Big Ten, that was sort of like and it just coincided with me being old enough to kind of make that decision too. But that was my coming out as a Michigan football fan, I guess, if you will. But not necessarily what I wanted to do. I didn't want to be a Penn State fan. And I mean, to be honest, you're not going to drive 3 hours every Saturday to go watch them in Happy Valley. So there's that. So today's topic is, what if college football was bigger in Philly? And tied to that, I want to talk about why is it not, and how could it have been? So to me, this is an interesting what if, just because there's just so many different layers and dynamics to it. And basically, people will argue that, oh, it's because of that, the NFL cities or this. I actually interviewed, when I was doing the research for the book, the former AD at LaSalle, Dr. Tom Brennan, and he flat out said the biggest challenge for schools in the city like LaSalle, like Temple, is that you have the NFL. So we have the Eagles, and there's competition and more options, meaning there is, you have basketball, you have hockey, you have baseball. So there's just so many other things that people can spend their entertainment dollars on that doesn't necessarily include college football. Again, I just don't buy it, because Philly is a football town. We live and die by the Eagles. And I mean, I remember when the Phillies were going on their run in the playoffs, and they would have a Sunday playoff game, and they always coincided sometimes with an early season Eagles game. And if they were on at the same time, instead of watching fully and being fully invested in the playoff game, I was flipping back and forth for the Eagles. So I just don't know. And that's no disrespect to Dr. Brennan. I don't buy that that's the reason. There has to me, there has to be something more to it, because you have there's not a lot of Division I teams. Many of the teams in the urban areas, especially on the East Coast, are the 1AA or the FCS teams. So in Boston, New York, Philly, and DC, you only have Temple and BC that are the Division I schools. But now you go down to that FCS level, you have a ton of schools that you would recognize their names if they were playing basketball. So you'd have like a Georgetown, Villanova, schools like that. And the other reason I don't buy it is because if you look at like a town like Chicago has a couple of teams, Division I teams. They have all four sports. LA has two of the most storied franchises in college football history. Miami's a little bit different of a city because it's down south, but you have the Heat, you have the Dolphins, you have the Marlins, and Miami football is huge. And to me, the one city that pretty much dispels that rumor is Pittsburgh. And the Pitt Panthers, they are a draw. If I've worked with a lot of people from Pittsburgh, and they live and die with that Pitt Panther team. They love them for basketball. They love them for football. They're very invested in it. There's still room for them to root on the Steelers, the Penguins, and well, not many of them admit it, but a lot of Pittsburgh teams or fans do like the Pirates. So to me, that just doesn't. There's again, I was racking my brain when I was doing this research and thinking about this last week, as I'm like, I want to do the episode on this, but it just, to me, that doesn't make any sense. The South is way different. So you look at the big cities in the South and their football. I mean, look at Friday Night Lights. Great movie, great TV show, but it's a whole different ball game down there. But I mean, if the Eagles are so huge in Philly and we are a football town, why can't a college football team do well? I mean, granted, Villanova, I'm sure does. I didn't check attendance records or anything like that, but I'm sure they do half decent with getting people to come there. But other than that, like, why can't Temple get people to consistently go to the games? Why did St. Joe's, Drexel, and LaSalle have to drop their football programs? I mean, even the Philadelphia Soul, the arena football team, they had a decent draw. They were on TV. I remember watching when they won the championship. The Philadelphia Stars in the USFL, they had a good following. And as a football town, it just blows my mind. And like I said, I don't buy it, because if you look at when Temple played Notre Dame in 2015, like that whole season for Temple, when they were nationally ranked, they had College Game Day coming down to Independence Hall, And to me, that is how awesome it could be. Now, is it a problem with the schools? Is it the fans? Is it a combination of both? I think it stems from the school. And even though Temple has been trying to go all in, and I know I'm speaking more of Temple because I'm just very familiar with the way the administration thinks and even the presidents they bring in, the athletic directors and everything. But they're going all in on football. The other schools, I don't think, especially Villanova, they focus more on basketball. And if you look at the Big Five schools, the history of college basketball is way richer than part of it's because the teams drop, but there's a rich history of college basketball in the city of Philadelphia. And even though football will sometimes bring in bigger money, I think schools like LaSalle, St. Joe's, they kind of have found their niche and they're just happy to be there, and that's what they do. Villanova, there's been, I don't know how many times, and when I was doing the research, a couple times they were talking about jumping up to Division One, and before the Big East got rid of all their football, joining the Big East for all their sports, including football, and making that jump from Division One AA to Division One. And they decided not to because, in part, and again, some of this is hearsay and just different things from people who I spoke to that wanted to be off the record about this. But there was a lot of like, hey, if we start putting money into football, we're going to lose our identity as a basketball program. And they dumped the money into the basketball program, and then look what happened. I mean, they've made it to like 3 Final Fours, won 2 national championships during the Jay Wright era. Conversely, if you look at the other side, you have a school like Temple who went all in for football and, in my opinion, neglected the basketball team. And I mean, when I was in school, and I have a few episodes coming up during college basketball season about this, but there's no place to be other than at the Liacouras Center while John Chaney's last couple of years when I was in school. It was great. And part of the reason they were sort of left behind and did what they did was because John Chaney loved being in the A-10. He didn't necessarily want to go to the Big East. And you had this sort of push and pull. And because Chaney had so much pull and power at the university, that's why all the sports, with the exception of football, stayed in the A-10. And in my opinion, I think that is why we are where we are right now. Obviously, there's a lot of other political things. I know there's stories about Nova pushing the Big East to not let Temple in for all sports, and that was part of why John Chaney doubled down. And again, who knows what happens behind closed doors and everything like that. But for my money, I think what happened is the university chose John Chaney. And don't get me wrong, I love John Chaney. He is one of my all-time favorite people. I had the privilege of meeting him a few times when I was down there. But I think once he retired and left, now what are you going to do? Fran Dunphy was not the answer. They had a decision to make, and they went with that history. And that ultimately is what impacted and affected the football team. And because the basketball team dropped off under Dunphy to a certain point, and I think the university said, screw it. We're going to dump our money into football. I know there's been talk about a stadium. That's a whole other issue for another time. But I think that's what happened. And now here we are with the way the landscape is in college football and all these super conferences. Temple's going to get screwed out of both basketball and football. But again, that's a whole other topic. I want to stick to the football here. So I do think the college basketball effect played a role in why some of these city schools dropped their football team. It was Drexel flat out said they were redistributing the money, and Drexel, for the most part, you know them for their college basketball team. So what if you could have done both? And again, it goes back to that the original question, what if college football was bigger? What if you could have still had that basketball focus and then still put some money into your college football? You keep the basketball focus. That's fine. The Big Five, the whole history going down to the Palestra and everything until Raleigh Massimino took the money and ran from the Big East. Thanks a lot, dude. But include football in the Big Five. Why couldn't you have a Big Five football? You could have all the teams still remain Division One for basketball and even stay in their respective conferences, or you could create conferences, whatever you want to do. So Penn has a Division One AA football team. They're Division One for basketball. Villanova, Division One basketball, one AA. So why couldn't Temple, St. Joe's, LaSalle, and Drexel do that too? I could also make the argument, and I might get into this in a later episode, or I might save that for next year. But I personally think sometimes that Temple would have been better off if they went one AA. So what if they do that? All 6 schools are one AA, or whatever the letters are now, FCS, CBS, ABC, whatever. Penn can still stay in the Ivy League. And then the other teams can either stay in their respective conferences for their other sports and basketball. But for football, they can join a football only, make their own football only conference, or join other schools on the East Coast that have Division One basketball and other programs, but then one AA football teams. So Georgetown, Fordham, the Patriot League, the Colonial Athletic, the Northeast Conference. The Metro Atlantic Conference actually had this, and that's where LaSalle, when they came back the second time, they played, but as their teams started dropping out, I think it was like Fordham, Georgetown, and LaSalle were the only 3 teams left in the conference. So that's part of what led to LaSalle dropping their football. But why couldn't Temple play in a conference with Georgetown, Fordham, and all the other Philly schools? And if it's about money, those schools are still solid when it comes to basketball. Those conferences, sure, they're the small guys. And right now we're seeing gigantic shifts in the way the college football landscape is. But why couldn't they do that? You could have the smaller on-campus stadiums. Hear that, Temple? That way you're not competing with the big boys. You're not having Temple go down to Lincoln Financial Field, and the only way you're going to sell out is if you have Notre Dame or Penn State come in. You have like a 10 to 20,000 seat stadium, maybe even 25, 30, whatever you want. And you're definitely going to make sure you're going to have a more intimate crowd. You're going to have smaller crowds. You're going to be able to sell it out though. And it's not good. You're not going to have to put trash bags on the upper level to make it not look so empty. And with today's landscape, you're set up now to be successful. As the big conferences are totally going to, I think eventually you're going to see they're going to be a semi-pro league where it's going to be a minor league feeder for the NFL. But traditional college football, now you're set up because you still have your Division One basketball program, but now you have what people are going to want once all this super conference realignment, whatever, all the dust settles. You're going to be set up. Oh, why can't you have the Mayor's Cup? And if all 6 of those teams, or even 5 of those teams, are in the same conference, you're going to play each other. So have a Mayor's Cup every year, just like you have the Big 5, and you can call it something else, but I'm just saying the Mayor's Cup because I know that's what, when Temple and Villanova played, that's what they had. Why can't you have St. Joe's and Temple and LaSalle and Drexel and Penn and Nova all compete for the city championship? I mean, I remember going back to middle school, football and basketball, we played, there were 3 middle schools, North Brandywine, South Brandywine, and Gordon. And we, trust me, we're 7th and 8th grade, but we wanted to play for that city championship. Like, yeah, we wanted to beat the Westchester and the Downingtown schools too. But if we lost all those games but beat North and Gordon, our year was set. So I think if you promote that, that could be something that could have been successful. For the bigger games, you could even go down to the Link or PPL Stadium in Chester and have the teams play in those larger stadiums. It'd be a good way to sell some money, or sell some tickets to make some money. You could do double headers. You could do St. Joe's and Nova at 12, and then Temple LaSalle at 4. Or if you wanted to get really crazy, do Mayor's Cup weekend and have all 6 teams playing 3 games. You have a Thursday, Friday, Saturday game, and have people just they're trying to pump up the area down there in South Philly with the casino and Xfinity Live and everything. There you go. I mean, you have people coming in, alumni will come in, like it's a big Mayor Cup weekend. Let's go. College football in Philly. But all of that is wishful thinking because, unfortunately, we only have Temple and Villanova that play college football. And the other 4 teams, or Penn too, I'm sorry. Penn also plays. But the other 3 teams dropped their programs long ago. So it is wishful thinking. I just wish they would have asked me back long before. I mean, I think this could work. And I think you have enough interest. If you're going to be able to have people wanting to have a parade for the Philadelphia Soul, the arena football team, for when they won their championship, yes, there were definitely conversations about that. People would come and see this. Drop all the teams down to 1AA. All of a sudden, you're creating excitement. You're creating a buzz. And it's wishful thinking. I am worried about my Owls and where they stand in the national picture, the big picture with everybody realigning. I think if this had happened 7 years ago, there's no doubt in my mind that they would at least had been in the ACC during all this, which the ACC apparently is getting poached now. So I don't know if that's a good thing. But I think if this had happened in 2015, when right before Matt Rule left, when he had them ranked high in the country, undefeated going into and almost beat Notre Dame, by the way, I think their impact is different. Instead, it's happening now. We got a new coach coming in after the old Rod Carey just wasn't his fault. He's just a terrible, terrible coach who was overmatched from the beginning. I didn't like him, but they got screwed when Manny Diaz decided to go back to Miami and how'd that work out. Anyway, don't want to go down a rabbit hole there, but I think once those big guys are going to start this semi-pro league, and I think it's going to end up being a minor league, I think you're set up right there. Where Temple goes from here, I don't know. Why college basketball or college football does not garner more interest, but people will watch Penn State. Is it because of the success? Is it because the team is just not that good? I don't know. I mean, until probably when Al Golden took them to their first bowl game, at this point, that's probably 15 years ago, 16 years ago. I've never seen Temple have a winning season, let alone thinking about going to a bowl game. So maybe that plays a role in it. And when Matt Rule was there, they did sell out some games. So who knows what the next step is? Who knows what domino is going to be next to drop? I mean, the Big Ten might have 20 teams by the time I'm done recording this. Who knows? But again, it's something that I think, at least in my head, I think it makes perfect sense. And I don't think St. Joe's and LaSalle and Drexel are going to bring their football teams back. If things keep going the way they are, I'll be surprised if Temple keeps theirs. But anyway, that's a whole other show. And like I said, I do have a lot of what ifs on Temple in general. A lot dealing with John Chaney and the football team, but this was specifically for college football. Everybody else gets started this weekend. Week 0 was last weekend, but I know starting Thursday night, Penn State plays, Michigan plays this weekend, so should be a good time. But Temple does play too. I'm anxious to see they play Duke, so maybe I come back on here and Drayton and the Owls are 1-0. Let's hope. But speaking of next time, we are going to get into the probably most I'm torn between this. I think for me, the Eagles and their what ifs, there are two main ones that always come to mind. And I see these questions asked on Twitter all the time. And that is, what if the fog never came into Chicago in the Fog Bowl? And the other is, what if Randall never blew out his knee the first game of the season in 1991? So next week, we're going to rip the Band-Aid off. I might shed a tear. I might get frustrated. I have no idea where that's going to go. But next week, we're going to dive into the Randall Cunningham episode to open up our football season. Don't worry, I still have some Phillies on the back burner here. They're still up 2.5 games heading into Monday night action. So we shall see what happens. But smash the like button, subscribe, leave me some feedback, some comments. Apparently, they tell me it helps the algorithm out, so anything will help. But let me know what you think, too. Would a plan like that work for college football? Or maybe I missed something. Maybe Dr. Brennan was right. Maybe there's just not enough bandwidth in the city for people to like college basketball or college football. So let me know what you think. Check me out on Twitter at Jimbo_Mont. And until next time, I'll see you when I see you.